Madam President, later this afternoon, we are going to have two votes on motions to proceed. They're procedural votes to go forward on two pieces of legislation relative to the issue of abortion. Those of us in public life know full well that this is a very controversial issue. There are people who feel very strongly on one side and very strongly on the other. These votes this afternoon will not resolve that conflict. They don't try to. What the Republican majority under Senator McConnell has decided to do is to bring back for a vote two items we've already voted on. We know the outcome. We can virtually predict within one or two votes what it's going to be. At the end of the day, the Republicans will be able to turn to a special interest group and say, we told you we'd call this every year. We did it. And we will have members who will vote their conscience on both sides of the aisle. But the net result of that is not going to be to change anything for the better in the United States when it comes to the issues that challenge us. What I'd like to do is come to this floor with a radical idea. I've got an idea how we can come together, regardless of our position on that issue, and do something constructive for this country. Let me tell you what I have in mind. The United States currently ranks 32nd out of 35 industrial nations when it comes to infant mortality. That's right, 32nd out of 35. When it comes to the survival of babies in the United States once born. A 2018 report published in Health Affairs by Global Health characterized the United States of America, and I quote, the most dangerous of wealthy nations for a child to be born into. What they found was that U.S. babies born in the United States, are 3 times as likely to die of premature birth and more than twice as likely to die of SIDS than babies in comparably rich countries. Every year, more than 23,000 infants die in the United States, largely due to factors that in many cases could have been prevented: low birth weight, maternal health complication, prematurity, and babies of color are particularly at risk. Black infants are twice as likely to die in America as white infants, a disparity that is greater than it was in the year 1850 in this country. We are not only losing babies, we're losing mothers as well. The United States, listen to this statistic, the United States is one of only 13 countries in the world where the rate of maternal mortality, mothers dying during the birth process related to pregnancy or childbirth for a year postpartum, is worse than it was 25 years ago. We haven't moved forward. We've moved backwards when it comes to mothers surviving childbirth. Nationwide, more than 700 women die every year as a result of pregnancy, and more than 70,000 suffer near-fatal complications. More than 60% of these deaths are preventable. Sadly, much like with babies, the tragedy of maternal mortality is even more pronounced when you look at communities of color. In the United States of America, women of color are 3 to 4 times more likely than white women to die as a result of pregnancy. And if you think it has something to do with poverty and wealth, that's what I thought, there's no correlation. The only correlation is race. In my state of Illinois, I'm sorry to report that if you are an African-American woman, you are 6 times more likely than a white woman to die in childbirth. That's why Congressional Representative Robin Kelly and I, Senator Tammy Duckworth, my colleague in the Senate, we joined in introducing the MOMMA Act in the United States Senate. First and foremost, more than anything, this bill would expand the length of time that a new mother can keep her Medicaid health coverage. Currently, Medicaid only has to cover women for 2 months after the child is born. Our bill would expand that to a full year. The Medicaid program pays for 50% of all births nationwide, 44% in Illinois. It's a big part of treatment of women who are giving birth to children. This program is vital for new moms and babies, and it makes no sense that a new mom's health coverage is terminated 2 months after she's given birth. Why don't we stick with her so she can live? Why don't we do something affirmative to say that we are committed to mothers and children on a bipartisan basis, regardless of our position on any other issue? The MOMMA Act would also provide access to doulas, as well as improve implicit bias and cultural competency training among healthcare providers. Too often, Black women are ignored or not taken seriously by healthcare providers. Doulas can help provide education, advocacy, and support for women whose voices today are being ignored. Further, our bill would establish national obstetric emergency protocols and ensure dissemination of the best practices for healthcare providers dealing with moms and babies. Finally, it would help standardize maternal and infant health data collection and reporting so we have a better idea of what's happening and why. Who supports this bill? The American Medical Association, Families USA, the March of Dimes, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, and the Black Mamas Matter Alliance. Our bill is supported by these and many other public health and provider organizations because it would actually save lives and improve the lives of moms and babies. We can debate the issue of abortion back and forth all day, and we know how the votes are going to turn out and that nothing is going to occur. Why don't we come together on something that's bipartisan, that says we're all dedicated to reducing the incidence of infant mortality and maternal mortality in this country? Isn't that one thing we can agree on? That's my challenge to the Senate chamber. Leader McConnell has made it clear that he has no intention of allowing the Senate to debate and pass legislation that will actually help families in need. I hope he's wrong. Instead, he wants us to vote only on controversial judicial nominees and politically charged anti-choice legislation that has no chance of passing. If he's serious about wanting to save the lives of babies and their mothers, I hope that he'll make an exception for the MOMMA Act. And now I'd like to make a unanimous consent request. I ask unanimous consent the Finance Committee be discharged from further consideration of S-916, the Mothers and Offspring Mortality and Morbidity Awareness Act, known as the MOMMA's Act, that the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration, the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
The senator from Nebraska.
Thank you, Madam President. Reserving the right to object, I would like to address Senator Durbin's comments, consent request through the chair. First off, I'm glad that the senator from Illinois wants to reduce infant mortality rates and wants to reduce maternal mortality rates. I agree on both of these goals. On the subject of infant mortality, the Senate is going to vote on one infant mortality bill in about an hour. You said a moment ago, or the senator from Illinois said a moment ago, 2 anti-choice pieces of legislation this afternoon. For reporters and for the public paying attention, Lindsey Graham's bill is about abortion, and I support Senator Graham's bill. I don't exactly agree with the characterization of it as leading with the anti-choice language, but it is an abortion bill. The second piece of legislation we're considering today is not in any way an abortion bill. So the anti-choice legislation rhetoric that you're using just doesn't have anything to do with the actual legislation that we're considering this afternoon. But I hope that you would consider on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act the fact that it is addressing some cases of infant mortality by making sure that babies that have survived abortion get care. These are babies that are already born and outside the mother, and the senator's passionate speech about infant mortality suggests either that we're doing more cynical posturing around here or that folks plan to actually support this bipartisan piece of legislation. I hope it's the latter. I sincerely hope that the senator would vote in accord with the positions he took earlier in his career and that we would vote in favor of getting some important stuff done on this legislation. But in addition to the comments he made on the subject of maternal mortality rates, I agree with him. Many of these tragedies are preventable, and I believe, despite being the second or third or fourth most conservative member of the Senate by voting record and believing in small government, I actually agree with him that we underfund a lot of these pieces of public health investment, and I would like us to do more to address preventable maternal tragedies as well. And so therefore, in a moment, I'm going to ask if the senior senator from Illinois would agree to modify his unanimous consent request to include the Grassley Amendment, and I'll use all the appropriate parliamentary language here at the end, but just for public understanding, this amendment, the Grassley Amendment, would give states $2.5 billion new dollars to address maternal health in at-risk communities. In addition, this amendment would give $200 million to address maternal mortality under the Maternal and Child Health Services Block Grant Program. What we're talking about here is more funding, fully offset for at-risk moms. No politics, no gimmicks. It is in line with the policy that the senior senator from Illinois was just advancing. It is my belief that the pro-life position is pro-baby and pro-mom and pro-science. And if the senator from Illinois wants to spend another $2.7 billion to help moms, I'm aligned with him, and it'd be great if we got that done together. If, however, we're just trying to change the subject from the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, and that means we can't advance a deal to protect these moms and babies, I think that would be disappointing. Therefore, I would like to ask the senator to modify his request to include the Grassley substitute amendment, which is number 1240. I would request that the Finance Committee be discharged from its consideration and that the amendment be considered agreed to and that the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection? Senator from Illinois.
Madam President, I do not question the sincerity of my colleague. I know that you come to this issue with a sincere heart, and I don't question that at all. What I'm saying to you is you and we could spend the rest of this day and the next on this floor debating the issue of abortion, and we're not going to resolve it, not in this chamber and not in this country. What I'm asking you to do is to look beyond the current issues that are coming to the floor this afternoon and try to find some common ground, Republicans and Democrats, on the issue of maternal mortality. You've got to be shocked, as I am, to read these numbers about the babies and mothers who are dying, particularly babies and mothers of color. And if we can do something as a nation to show we truly do care about this, even though we have differences on that issue of abortion, wouldn't that be a breakthrough for this chamber? I think the people across this country would applaud us and say, well, they finally did something. They finally came to an agreement. So what I proposed is, I think, the MOMMA Act, a good bill, and one that I think should pass, and you proposed an alternative. Here's an idea. Listen to this radical idea. What if we bring the MOMMA Act to the floor, and I agree that we will debate an amendment, any amendment they want to offer? You know what we would be? It would be like the United States Senate. It would be the Senate. Think of it. You as a Republican and me as a Democrat actually debating an issue that makes a difference in America, putting our best ideas for a vote on the Senate floor. How about that for a notion? Now, we're not going to get anywhere with your proposal this afternoon because we've tested it before. We know the outcome. We know the final vote. And I would say that your proposal, your alternative proposal, once offered by Senator Grassley on the floor when I tried this before, is just inadequate. The resources aren't there to deal with the scope and gravity of the problem. So why don't we do this? Why don't we act like senators? Why don't we do something on a bipartisan basis and bring an issue to the floor that truly counts and people care about? It would be a breakthrough. It might make a headline. It might even make a tweet somewhere. What I'd suggest to you, though, is this is not the way to do it. It's your way or my way. Bring it to the floor. Join me in doing that on a bipartisan basis. Appeal to Senator McConnell to finally let the Senate be the Senate. You know, we have people come to the galleries here and look down on these desks and say, you know, I think there used to be senators who sat in those desks who actually legislated, actually debated, actually had amendments. Last year, we had 22 amendments on the floor of the Senate under Senator McConnell. Why no more than 22? That's it. We're not talking about anything else. If you truly want to join me in a bipartisan debate on this floor, on this issue of infant and maternal mortality, let's do it. For the time being, I have to object to what you proposed. But please, I didn't question your sincerity in bringing this issue. I hope you won't question mine in suggesting we ought to be the Senate and debate this issue. Object.
Objection is heard. Is there objection to the original request?
I feel, reserving the right to object, I feel like we're now
Senator from
at
Nebraska.
turtles all the way down because we're in an objection to an objection to an objection. But let me at least agree with the last point that my colleague from Illinois made, that I think it would be great if this chamber had 80 or 90 or 95 or 100 people in it instead of, today we're at 3, which is a high water mark. Usually there's 1 or 2 people in here. Barasso's here, we have 4. We're setting a record. I don't think a lot of us think that the month we all spent here was ideal last month during impeachment, but one thing that was new is that a lot of senators spent time talking to each other. So to your grand point about wishing we were debating, we're aligned. But I do want to say one more thing before I object, which is, you said you're not questioning my sincerity. I appreciate that. You asked that I would not be questioning your sincerity. I'm not, but I am questioning your logic, because you summarized it as if there are 2 issues at play. And you said anti-abortion legislation and maternal health funding. There are 3 issues at play on the floor today. One of them is Lindsey Graham's pain-capable bill, which is a pro-life piece of legislation. One of them is Senator Durbin's funding requests about maternal delivery health. Those things are true, but there is a third thing which, yet again, you obscured by saying the debate here is funding maternal health or having anti-abortion legislation. The piece of legislation we're voting on today, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, is not about abortion. I am pro-life. I'm going to support Lindsey Graham's bill, but the bill we're voting on doesn't change anyone's access to abortion. It doesn't have anything to do with Roe v. Wade. It is about babies that are already born. CNN said this morning on TV, they made up this insane phrase. They said, a fetus that has been born. The heck is that? It's another way of saying they don't want to debate the actual debate we're having on the floor today. The debate we're having, we're going to vote once on Lindsey Graham's pro-life legislation. I'm going to support it. But we're also going to vote on a piece of legislation that is about the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. These are about babies that are born that are outside their mother. And what's actually happening is the senior senator from Illinois is wanting to obscure the debate because he wants to use euphemisms about choice so that you don't have to admit to the American public that what's actually happening in the floor today is probably that, like last year, 44 Democrats are going to filibuster an anti-infanticide bill. There's nothing in the bill that's about abortion. Nothing. It's about infanticide. That's the actual legislation. And you got 44 people over there who want to hide from it and talk in euphemisms about abortion because they don't want to defend the indefensible, because you can't defend the indefensible. We're talking about killing babies that are born. That's the actual legislation we're voting on today in the Senate. That's what the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act is. Is it okay in the eyes of the United States Senate for us to say, well, you can't actively kill the little baby. You can't take a pillow and put it over her face and smother her to death, but you can back away and kill her that way. That's what Ralph Northam, the disgraced governor of Virginia, was talking about when he said, well, once the baby's born, if she survives an abortion, and we wish that hadn't happened, then we'll figure out a way to keep her calm for a little while the doctors debate what they want to do. What he means is kill the baby. That's the legislation we're voting on today. There are three buckets. Lindsey Graham's Pain-Capable Act, that's a bill about abortion. There's another bill that is about babies that have already been born. Newsflash, CNN, if you're a baby and you've been born and you're outside of mama, nobody calls that a fetus. You just want to call it a fetus because you don't want to cover the actual story that's being voted on in the U.S. Senate today. Then there's a third piece of legislation, which is Senator Durbin's counterproposal today about maternal preventable deaths and investment in that case, that category. I'm interested in that category as well, but you don't actually want to talk about the legislation that's on the floor, so you're changing the subject. Therefore, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President,
Senator from Illinois.
infanticide should be a crime, and it is. That's what the senator from Nebraska will not concede. He thinks he's come up with a novel idea. You shouldn't be able to kill a baby with impunity in America. It is not novel. It has been in the federal law for over a decade. It is in state laws all across the United States. Any doubts about it? Be prepared to write down a name. The name Kermit Gosnell. Kermit Gosnell. 13 years ago, I believe it was, this physician was convicted of infanticide. He is now serving life without parole plus 30 years. To argue that you have some novel idea that infanticide should be a crime and we don't cover it now under the law is just not accurate, and it's not factual. And that's why I think your bill is unnecessary. This bill is necessary. Mothers are dying, and babies are dying, and we can do something about it. And it doesn't matter whether you go to a pro-life or a pro-choice rally, we ought to all agree that this is something that we could do on a bipartisan basis.
Madam, just for the record, just so we all have it clear, the senator talked about infanticide, and he's right. Active infanticide is illegal under federal law. There are no crimes for it in half the states, but more fundamentally, what the Senate is considering today is passive infanticide. It turns out every baby, whether she's born in a glistening NICU unit at a fancy hospital with a lot of rich cars in the parking lot, or whether a baby is born in the unfortunate circumstances of an abortion clinic in a strip mall, every baby at 1 day old, at 5 days old, turns out they die if you wander away from them and you deny them care. If you don't give them warmth, if you don't give them food, they die. And so passive killing, passive infanticide is not illegal under federal law. The senator said infanticide is illegal, and he's half right. Active infanticide is illegal under federal law. You cannot take a pillow and smother a newborn baby to death. But what you can do, and what does happen in abortion clinics across America, and why we held a Judiciary Committee hearing on this 2 weeks ago to hear from medical and legal community experts who know what the practice looks like, is you can take that vulnerable, innocent little tiny fetus and you can put her on a cart and you can walk her down the hall and you can put that cart in a closet and you can leave her to die by exposure. And that's what we should prevent, and that's what this legislation is about. Thank you, Madam President.